And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of Still Curtain. And joining me, as always, is Shayne Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. We've got some news breaking today involving Deshaun Watson that heavily involves the Steelers matchup this week in Week 11, as Pittsburgh looks to advance to 7-3 on the season, coming off of two straight home wins, first against the Titans on Thursday Night Football, and then they had 10 days to prepare for the Green Bay Packers, who they narrowly took down this past week. We're going to preview the Steelers-Browns game. We're going to talk about Deshaun Watson, what that means for the Steelers, for the AFC outlook in general, and from the playoff picture. And we're also going to talk about the devastating injuries the Steelers have had to the linebacker position. What can they do to help there? But first, Shayne, let's start off with rehashing the Steelers versus Packers game for a few minutes here. It was kind of close throughout, like a lead change late in the third quarter. I mean, just the prototypical football that we've come to see from the Pittsburgh Steelers. You can't win handedly anymore, even with the extra time to prepare, even with going against a young offense, all the injuries that Green Bay had. I mean, obviously they kind of just play their football and cover four and make sure you can't pass the ball, although the Steelers ran right down their throats, which is, I guess, why everybody's calling for Joe Barry's head right now as well. So is one of those games where you had a clash of two coordinators, and somebody had to come away victorious. It was Matt Canada this time around.
Yeah, and it's tough if you're excuse me, a Packers fan right now, because you have a really young offense that clearly is still figuring it out, and they have their own issues. And LaFleur, I think, hasn't done as good of a job as maybe people expected, kind of working around that. And it's hard to be in that position where you really don't have many veterans to lean on, with the offensive line injuries, Bakhtiari being out, and Aaron Jones being in and out of the lineup this year. And he's kind of your best veteran player. It's just hard. But on the defensive side, they do have a lot of veterans. And they're missing guys like Alexander and Quay Walker, and like that's going to impact the defense. But Joe Barry just doesn't do anything to help his defense in certain situations. He kind of does his thing, and the Steelers are guilty of this in their own way as well in defense, but we've been able to get away with it much more than Joe Barry has. And I think the run game especially, and we talked about it in the lead up to the game, I knew we could run on this team because that's kind of their MO. Is they're not going to defend the run very well because they're going to be in a lot of quarters coverage. They're going to be off man. Like, it's just there's going to be lanes to run through. And in this game, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, I mean, Steelers 205 yards on the ground, a pair of scores. The Steelers are now averaging over 185 rushing yards a game over their past two contests. We're going to see how that is going to stack up against the Browns and their defense and some of the data that I collected there. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Do you have any winners and losers from this game from the Steelers, Shayne?
I mean, the biggest winner obviously is the run game in general, but Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren were both pretty fantastic. Warren especially, and Najee still has this thing where, and I've talked about it before, if he just stopped spamming like the hurdle button every time he was in the open field, he'd probably get like another 4 or 5 yards in most of those situations. And I get it. He's athletic enough to do it. He likes doing it. It worked for him a lot in college, and like it's even worked in the NFL at times. But I just want to see him just really completely destroyed defensive back in the open field one of these times. And I know he can do it. He's got the size, the power, but outside of that, I mean, they were both still very, very good. Najee still had a big run in 24-yarder, and Jaylen had, I think, a 20-yarder of his own. Like, it was just all working in the run game. And a lot of that's, Broderick Jones being in the lineup now. A lot of that's, again, Joe Barry just not really having an interest in stopping the run for whatever reason that would be. But again, like, our offensive line dominated them for the most part, and so did our rushing game. So that's really the biggest winner of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it was an awesome performance on the ground. Obviously, you wish that this would translate to points more often than it does. Yeah. It does help with time of possession. It helps keep your defense a little bit fresher than they have been. I think prior to that game, Steelers were 30th in time of possession. Something to check and see what they are right now, but it didn't move the needle much because I think the Steelers had them by like a minute or two in this game.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot. Yeah.
And what's concerning, I think, is Watt and Highsmith both. They're just playing too many snaps.
Yeah,
I mean, both over. You got to find a way to limit these guys a little bit because they're going to be so worn down by the end of the year. Let's talk about the Quan Alexander news here for a second, Shayne. This was a big one. We're going to break down the linebacker position here in our second part of the show. But just your initial thoughts from this injury for the Steelers. Like, how big is this?
It's huge because Alexander was the only guy left on the roster, linebacker, that could handle, 3-down duties. Like, as much as Landon Roberts is a good player overall, We know what he is. He's a downhill thumping linebacker who struggles to move in space. And there's a lot of guys like that, and they all have their role. But if you ask him to play a ton of snaps, you're going to see, and we're talking about winners and losers of the game. Like one of the losers was the linebackers once Alexander went out. Like they just could not cover the middle of the field. There's multiple times where him and Mark Robinson were just not even in the same zip code as the receivers in the middle of the field, and that was part of their responsibility. And again, it's not really fair to Roberts because that's not what his job was supposed to be. He was supposed to be the first and second down guy, the one that comes in to kind of help out with the run defense. And now he is in a situation where he's the green dot guy. He has to be the communicator out there because you have a young player in Mark Robinson who just probably isn't ready. And everyone else has been added in the last couple of weeks, right? Like Michael Walker. I think it's Tariq Carpenter, I believe, is the other linebacker currently on the roster. Yeah. All those guys are players that haven't been with us for very long. So he kind of fell into that role. And without Alexander out there now and Holcomb out there, it's going to mean a lot for the middle of that defense. It just is. We had issues there for the past couple of years for a reason, right? And you bring the two guys that were starting in. Without them now, it's going to maybe be even worse than it was before we got them in.
Yeah, and Lynn Roberts goes from being a part-time linebacker with his niche, that downhill role, to being a guy that's got to be out there all the time. And Mark Robinson now gets elevated to a big role. So we'll talk about that here in just a second. Let's talk about Deshaun Watson, though. This is the big one of the day. And this is going to be a big storyline for the rest of the year. I mean, the Browns have not been getting their money's worth out of their $230 million quarterback. That's for sure so far. For those who don't know, was reported earlier today by the Cleveland Browns organization on Twitter that Deshaun Watson needs to have shoulder surgery to repair his shoulder to avoid any further setback. And so he is effectively done for the season. Also had an MRI on his leg and has a high ankle sprain as well. I think that's what the other one was there too. So, so not good news if you're a Browns fan right now. And I know that Deshaun has been up and down during his kind of brief tenure with Cleveland because he didn't play until late last season. He was kind of banged up in and out of the lineup this year. And now something like this. And this is a 6-3 football team. It's one that happens to have a really good defense. It happens to have the front runner for the Defensive Player of the Year award this year in Myles Garrett. And so the Browns had a lot of things going for them. And it just, when it looked, I mean, they're coming off of also a 33-point victory over 33-31 over the Ravens on the road. It was a big win, divisional win. And so now this happens, just such a killer to their season potentially. And we're going to break that down with everything else that we're going to talk about in the Steelers versus Browns matchup. But what are your quick thoughts on the Watson injury, Shayne?
Yeah, like you said, as much as he hasn't lived up to the player that they wanted him to be when they signed him to that contract, they wanted the Deshaun Watson that was firmly in the conversation for a top 5 quarterback while he was in Houston. They haven't gotten that guy. I don't think that guy exists personally anymore for a multitude of reasons, but I think he clearly gives them the best chance to win, of the quarterbacks they have. It's not a huge bar to clear, but it still is the bar. And more importantly, they started to figure something out, weirdly enough, in that Browns game with the short passing game, because he has not been effective down the field. And I think part of that is just, some amount of rust still being knocked off. Some of it is just the timing of things and him not feeling comfortable with kind of the big shot plays, because a lot of that is about being on time with your throws, making sure the throw comes out at a certain time to get the ball where it needs to be. And that's where he struggled the most. But if you can get him to be really effective in the short game and stop taking sacks and taking the hits that he was taking, that kind of was getting him banged up, that's probably their best path to success moving forward. But now we're not going to see that again until next year, probably. In the short term, it does impact their ability to win games, because I do think that as good as their defense is, it's kind of a situation with the Steelers too, where like our quarterback play and our lack of offensive prowess in general does put a lot of pressure on the defense. And in certain situations, like if they do play a team that can score a lot of points, do they win that game they won against the Ravens if PJ Walker starts the whole game? I just feel like the answer is probably no. And that's kind of their main concern moving forward, I think, is can they beat the teams that maybe they did have a shot against, even with Deshaun not playing great, with a PJ Walker / now Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who's expected to start.
Yeah, it's the thing is their defense has been so good that they could have potentially. And so Watson's arm looked a little bit toast to me, like earlier. Like there's some throws that he's tried to make, like rolling out of the pocket, and just did not seem to have that same arm strength. He's a young enough guy. If he gets the surgery, who knows what he's going to look like afterwards. But I mean, maybe it could do a number on him. Some of these throws that he's had this year that have been like well short and undercut by defenders. And it's like, it kind of reminds me of like 2020 Ben Roethlisberger, 2021, where it's like after that injury there. And no, it didn't seem to, at least. So we'll see what he looks like. And we have to wait until next year to find out. Big blow to the Cleveland Browns. All right. The Still Curtain podcast is running a deposit match promotion up to $100 for any new Sleeper Daily Fantasy user. Make sure to use code FANSIDED2 when signing up to receive your deposit match. Please remember to always game responsibly. Scan the QR code on the screen to see if you qualify.
Yeah, up at the top there.
All right, Shane, let's talk about the injuries to the linebacker position and whether or not the Steelers can overcome these this year. What we said yesterday on the live show that we did yesterday, that the one combination you couldn't have of injuries at the off-ball linebacker position was Holcomb and Alexander going down for the season, and that's exactly what happened. It would have been better had it had been Holcomb and Roberts or Alexander and Roberts or any other combination, but you take the two guys off the field that can move in space. You take the two guys off the field that have at least a little bit of coverage chops, and you can't afford to lose that because coverage is already an issue for your entire secondary, minus Minkah and Porter this year, and Minkah hasn't been healthy. And so it just creates more chaos, I guess, in the defense, especially when it comes to pass coverage situations. So let's focus in on the linebacker position specifically right now. And what is the plan moving forward here? What do you think the Steelers are going to try to deploy in this linebacker rotation?
I think at first, from what Tomlin said in his press conference, it sounds like Roberts is going to be the green dot guy, of course, which that's expected. And I think him and Robinson are going to get the most snaps against the Browns, or at least that's what they're going to start. Yeah. Now, I think the question becomes, do they move, especially Robinson, out of the lineup if he's not really performing well at all, and give a chance to a guy like Michael Walker or Tariq Carpenter? I think that's likely. I think we see both of those guys not only active, but I think we see them play to some degree, because I think they just need to find out, can they add anything? Can they give them something that those two can't? And I think at least with the other two, there's more athleticism there at this point for sure. And that gives you a better chance in coverage. But again, there's a reason why those guys are not on their teams that they started with and why they're backups right now. They're not exactly, veterans that are proven. So you kind of have to take that as you will. But I think the plan is to try to give the guys who just, finished the game this last week the chance to prove they can be the full-time guys. And if they can't, that's when you go to the other two to see if you can get something out of them.
Yeah, it's so hard to rely on guys that we have not seen play a snap yet in a Steelers uniform, really. Yeah. And so if they're called up, and I'd imagine at least one of these guys gets called up this week, you can't go into the game with two off-ball linebackers and nothing
Not
else.
Not with our luck recently, no.
So no, you can't risk that again. And so I am interested to see if those guys get out there, if either Carpenter or Walker gets out on the field, whoever it's going to be, what they look like. Do they look like they have a little bit more coverage chops than the combination of Roberts and Mark Robinson? Because these guys are just not great movers in space. They can come downhill. Very Vince Williams-like in that way, where their forte is coming down and stopping the run. They are very, very physical. They are Mike Tomlin-type football players. I think he spoke wonders about them in that regard, in their physicality in the past. And I went and looked at these guys a little bit, Shane. The Steelers now starting linebackers in Roberts and Robinson. These guys come in just a little bit over 5'11". They got short arms, no wingspans. They're average at best athletes, like running like the 4.65 range ish. And there was a time, Shane, when that used to be a good number back when you had like 6'3", 6'4" linebackers, 250 pounds. That's not a good number for a guy that's 5'11" and 235 pounds. Like these are short, compact linebackers that can't disrupt a lot of passing lanes and don't have the juice and recovery speed. And we saw that, unfortunately, with Roberts specifically last week, going against a guy like Luke Musgrave, who's just a terrible mismatch. He couldn't get more different in that regard, where Musgrave can just long stride right past him. And that's exactly what we saw. And so when we get these matchups, like we got David Njoku this week for the Browns, and we saw him make a really nice grab and run after the catch this past week. Can the Steelers linebackers hang with these guys? And if the answer is going to be like a resounding no, well, then we've got big issues. What do you do then? And so I guess the question, Shane, is if these guys aren't cutting it specifically in passing situations, third down, even just your standard nickel, like they can't stick with. It's like having two guys out there that just can't cover worth a lick. What do you do in that case?
I think in the question, I think should the Steelers look for free agent help was asked a lot as soon as this happened, as soon as
Mhm.
Alexander went down officially for the season. The problem is just like at this point in the season, if you're looking for coverage, you're not finding it. Like if
Yeah.
you can cover somebody, you're on a team right now. Realistically, like that's kind of the main
Mhm.
issue. It'd be different if we missed Roberts, right? If he was injured and Robinson wasn't cutting it, you could go find a thumper. You could go find somebody on a practice squad or something somewhere where Rashawn Evans is the name that's been brought up. Where I think he'd be a good ad because he has more experience than some of the other guys, but I don't expect him to make a huge impact in coverage. It's kind of the reason he's not
Yeah.
starting for a team right now is, he doesn't have those coverage chops. So that's my main concern is you can add somebody. And I feel like at some point that probably will happen, whether it's because of more injury or because these guys aren't cutting it, but it's probably not going to be for the sole case of trying to help the coverage. It might just be just adding a body just to see if they can help at all. Like it's not going to probably come from
Mhm.
the coverage chops way.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about the free agent pool and just how depleted it is
Yeah, it's
already.
just
Like
not
you got
there.
guys that are past their prime. I mean, any more the running or excuse me, the linebacker position is like the running back position
It is in a
of the
lot of ways.
defense where these guys take so much wear and tear on their bodies that 28, 29 years old, a lot of these guys are done by that point in their career. And so you obviously hate to see the injuries to Holcomb and to Quan. And I think that Holcomb with that ACL, I think that he'll end up making that recovery and getting back on the field. He's obviously under a 3-year contract, so he'll be back next year. Quan, I don't know if and when he will be
Yeah,
back. I mean, that's
that's a tough one.
having a ruptured Achilles at this stage in his career with his injury history is a very unfortunate blow to his career path. So I hope that they do well in the recovery process. But for the Steelers right now, like you're right, the options are just so
Yeah.
limited. And so how do you overcome these holes at the linebacker position? Shayne, one thought that I had is I think you need to adopt a lot of what Dan Quinn is doing over in Dallas. Like get like 4 safeties on the field at the
Yeah.
same time, because I think that is part of the way to mask your weaknesses in these certain areas and to get more coverage ability on the field. Now, I'm not a big Keanu Neal fan. I think that if you've listened to the podcast before, you probably know that. Neal was not a super fast or athletic player to begin with, even when he came out as first round pick for the Falcons way back when. And he certainly hasn't gotten more athletic after a couple season ending injuries.
Yeah.
However, he's still probably, unfortunately, an improvement over a Mark Robinson or an Landon Roberts if you have to use him on a 3rd and 9, a 3rd and 11, whatever the case may be, where you can get him on the field and at least trust him a little bit more playing in the box, covering a tight end, covering a running back out of the backfield, doing those types of things. And so whatever's going to help you in coverage, they're going to need that assistance there, because we know that even before the injuries to Holcomb and Quan, who were not part of the problem really on defense,
No,
it was
not
more
at
of their
all.
secondary. They've already had some gaping holes with Levi Wallace. Patrick Peterson wasn't playing well.
Mhm.
The safety opposite of Minka, very, very sporadic play all over the board there. So I think getting these guys on the field, and I talked a little bit yesterday on the show as well. I think Elijah Riley, I think
Yeah.
that he's a guy that should be part of the mix moving forward. See what you have in him. He's a guy that can play a little bit of safety, a little bit of slot corner, a little bit of box. And so he's a guy that I'd be interested to see how he fits in this puzzle.
Yeah, I think the answer, especially once Mika gets back, especially for third downs or just passing down situations, is to get a third or fourth safety pretty consistently on the field. Like that's really their best avenue in the short term to try to help with the coverage. I think for this game in particular, since we'll be talking about the Browns game more in depth here in a little bit, I think they just need to bring these guys a lot. They like don't even get them involved in coverage to begin with. They just bring these guys on blitzes. Maybe you mug up the A gaps and you just take it because you're facing a rookie quarterback who struggled in his only start. And again, it was on like hours notice apparently, and like there's a lot of issues
Mhm.
with that, and he probably didn't get the practice reps he needs. So he should be better prepared for this game, but in the short term, like just bring pressure on this kid. Like that's probably the answer for this week at least. And then after that, it comes down to can you find the right combination of guys to bring in the secondary to help with that responsibility and coverage. So
Yep. I agree. And I'll be interested to see how this dynamic works without,
mhm.
I think, the 2 best linebackers, because they're most
Oh right,
complete players
yeah,
on the Steelers. So maybe an advantage slightly against the run, but possibly a bigger hole
that's right.
in the secondary than what a lot of fans realize. And so I'm hoping that's not the case.
Right.
And I hope that these guys prove me wrong here. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Still Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shayne, any questions you want to hit from the chat here at all?
Yeah, I wanted to do that real quick. So we have a couple. This one is just two chats from our Barley, I think is how you'd say it. Again, he's been in a couple times. Hey guys, what's your take on everyone calling for Canada to be fired? People need to know he's limited design based off of what his quarterback can do and what his head coach wants. And then he says as well, Tomlin's essentially running the offense. Canada just calls plays. Nothing will change with the new OC when your head coach is not giving you freedom and your quarterback is limited. I think there's some truth to all that. I think that, and we touched on it in the show yesterday about how the mentality of the Steelers is a lot to do with their offensive problems and not just the play calling. I do think if they had this style and this mentality with a better play caller, it would still be more successful. But I do think the general idea of what they want to accomplish offensively is the biggest issue here. It's not just, okay, well, they're not good and the coordinator's not good or the quarterback's not good. It's not that simple. It is this overall philosophy that they have that is crushing them really offensively. It's just limiting them so much. And at the end of the day, a new offensive coordinator will help if it's the right hire. But you're right. If Tomlin does want him to play the ball control, protect the football as much as physically possible game plan, it's still going to be limited. Like you're not going to see the big production in the passing game. You're not going to see consistency in the running game, especially early in the season until they figure it out. Like that's just kind of where they're at. So,
yeah. And I think it's somewhat fair. Even if you wanted to, at this point, you kind of divide the blame in thirds a little bit. When you talk about the big three of Mike Tomlin's philosophy, where we're just not going to turn the ball over, Matt Canada, his play calling and his sequencing, and then the unspectacular play of Kenny Pickett. Now, obviously, it's not an exact science.
No, it's not that simple.
More the blame of the others. I think, honestly, recently, over these last 3 games, I think it's been more Pickett, honestly, than anybody else. The execution has to be there as well. And the execution hasn't been all there. Obviously, if you get Pickett a better coordinator, Pickett can improve. Vice versa, you get a better play or I got lost where I was, Shayne. I did the coordinator.
Better philosophy, maybe, probably.
Philosophy, if the philosophy changed a little bit and you're a little bit more willing to throw the ball over the middle of the field and take some chances, then Pickett could improve. So it's a give and take type thing. The Steelers are finding a balance they think works for them. Shayne and I obviously voiced how we think it's going to work in the postseason. And so when you just can't score points, it's hard to win football games. And by the way, for what it's worth, 15.5 points per game is where the Steelers are at. Offensive points per game if you take away their 2 defensive scores and the safety they had this year. Not good. I mean, it's near the bottom of the league. So a little bit discouraging right there. All right, Shayne, let's move on to our anything else?
There was one other comment I saw here. And actually, I know this Jeremiah here. He actually watches the other show that I do weekly with the PSF app and stuff like that. So glad to see here. Who else thinks that TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, and the rest of the Steelers defense isn't salivating knowing Watson's done for the season? Yeah, I think that they are very happy to be playing a rookie quarterback. As much as Watson likes to run around and probably helps them get sacks, like they're definitely, I'm sure, excited to face a rookie quarterback because this team is usually very good at dealing with. So thanks for hopping in here, Jeremiah.
Yeah, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson was that preseason stud for them. Obviously didn't do so hot in his first start. We're going to talk about that in just a second here. So let's get to this preview, Shayne. Steelers versus Browns, Week 11. So much on the line here, and I don't know if anybody would have predicted that both of these AFC North teams would be 6-3 heading into this game, considering that you also have the Ravens and the Bengals in the division as well. And still every team in this division has a winning record. It's like the best in NFL history. The furthest point along in NFL history where all 4 teams have had a record of what they have or better. And so it's impressive to see. And I think a lot of people would call the AFC North the strongest division in football out there. I don't think you would be wrong. I think the Ravens and the Bengals, or excuse me, the Ravens and the Browns both have spectacular defenses so far this year. Great TVOA, EPA, all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about this matchup specifically. The Steelers were, just before the Deshaun Watson moves, I looked at this morning on DraftKings, they were 4-point road underdogs against the Browns this Sunday. That line shifted rather quickly when we heard of the Deshaun Watson news. It went to plus 2.5 for the Steelers. From there, the line got bet quickly to +2.
Mm-hmm.
So now it was at +2, and I can even look it up to see if it's shifted further since then. But
it might have
when they did the initial, I'm sure they didn't know, the odds makers probably didn't know that if it's going to be PJ Walker or Dorian Thompson-Robinson, because we didn't know, and we were on it. So now it does, like Jordan Schultz, NFL reporter, confirmed that it's going to be Dorian Thompson-Robinson that is starting for the Browns, which makes sense. We've seen a lot of PJ Walker and the struggles he's had. Just one passing touchdown to go with 5 picks this year. Not a great sample size when he's had to fill in for Watson. Shayne, the line has moved again. It is +1 for the Steelers.
Ooh, yeah.
And I wrote an article this morning where I said it could be a pick 'em by the end. The Steelers might be favored by the end of this if the line keeps getting bet this way.
Yeah, depends.
I had an article come out. I tried to do it as fast as I could to say, now's the time to take the Steelers in the bet because you can still get them at good odds. Those odds have almost broken even at this point, for what it's worth. Anybody that's betting out there. So let's take a look at this. This has moved now. So Steelers are 1-point underdog. So apologize for that. This just happened while we were doing the show. 34.5 points per game was the over-under spread, and that has shifted down to 33.5 with the Dorian Thompson-Robinson news. So it's going to be one of those, at least odds makers think, like 16-17 type football games, which is not hard to imagine why they would have that thought process. So let's talk about this. Deshaun Watson out, Dorian Thompson-Robinson in.
Yep.
What do you make of this? How big of a difference is this? I know that a lot of people are super hard on Deshaun. They don't like him as a person, whatever.
Fair.
And that's all fair. That's all fine. Deshaun, though, I do feel like he gets a little bit too much criticism as a quarterback because he still makes plays. I mean, you watch that Browns game, he still made some plays down the stretch. He was good in the second half. He helped lead that come from behind touchdown drive. And again, they scored 33 points in that game. One of those was from a defensive score. But he still had a decent performance overall. Been a little bit of a roller coaster ride, but we have seen this guy do well in the past. And obviously, compared to the sample that we're looking at between PJ Walker and now that it's going to be Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who, I mean, in his lone start this year, Shayne didn't throw a touchdown, threw a trio of interceptions in a 28-3 loss against the Ravens back in week 4, I believe that was. And so not a good game at all from him. I think they're trying to give him a second look because he's a younger, fresher guy, the athlete, not that Walker's an athlete as well, but they know who Walker is at this point. I think they're trying to find out who DTR is at this point. So how do you think, what kind of a drop off is this from Deshaun to Robinson?
I think the major drop off is just that, again, Watson has so much experience under his belt, despite the rust that he's clearly still kind of dealing with, I think, to a certain degree. And he also should at least know the offense significantly better, right? I mean, DTR's only been there since obviously being drafted this year. He clearly didn't have command of the offense in his lone start. And again, you could argue that because of the circumstances where they didn't know he was going to be starting until like hours before, apparently, at least that's what was reported. That had a big impact on it. So you think it should be better in this game. But at the end of the day, Deshaun Watson is still a professional quarterback and has been one for much longer and has that experience, like I said. I think the biggest drop-off is how does he handle pressure? How does he handle getting looks that he doesn't expect? Now, against the Steelers, that won't happen as much as it might against, when he played the Ravens or other teams, unfortunately. But I think the pressure alone, like understanding, okay, the tackles are banged up, if not out. I think DeJuan Jones, I'm not sure if he's out for this week or not. I know he missed this past week. Jedrick Wills is obviously out. Like, their tackles situation is going to be difficult. Like, it's a tough situation to go into for any quarterback. We've seen how PJ Walker's played, right? And he's a professional quarterback in his own right that's played plenty of games. It's going to be a drop off. The amount, I think, is really dependent on the Steelers' ability to bring pressure on this guy. That's going to be the biggest, I think, factor is how can he handle pressure? And then if he can handle it, is it just with his legs? Do they just have to play contain? Can he make some throws while being pressured? That's going to be the biggest thing in the game, I think.
Yeah, DTR certainly has some things working against him. Jedrick Wills is on IR. The jury's still out on DeJuan Jones for this week. We haven't seen the injury report yet, but there's a chance that he might not be available as well. The last that I heard, at least. And so I think that knowing what the pass rushers that you're coming after you anyway, and now that I think that Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt have done a fine job being able to move the ball. Obviously, having Nick Chubb would help. He's one of the best in the league to do so. But yeah, just a couple of disadvantages here. So at least he does get the week to prepare, knowing that
Right.
he's going to be that guy now. But it does make you wonder, Shayne. I got to ask, do the Browns kind of regret trading Josh Dobbs for nothing right before the start of the season? Because Dobbs has won 2 straight games for the Vikings now, brought them up to a 6-4 record. He had the huge upset win over the Dallas Cowboys when he was the Cardinals quarterback on just a completely untalented football team. So Dobbs has shown some flashes, and I think that I mean, it's been, again, not everything terrific from his part either, but he's shown some ability there. He's experienced. He's obviously a very smart guy. Would he be that guy right now if the Browns had not traded him?
I think so, and we'll talk about it, but I just wanted to throw this, the 13-10 Steelers on the defensive touch. Yeah, I mean, this is how it's probably going to go.
That's the type of game that we could be
Yeah, I
in
just
for.
wanted to throw that out there. I thought it was funny. No, I think you're right. I think the Dobbs situation is funny because realistically, if he was on this team right now, there'd be no question who was starting the game. There'd be no question about whether or not he could handle it either. We know at this point. I may have said it on this show, or it may have been another show I was doing, because at this point it all kind of blends together. But I feel like Josh Dobbs is the anti-Ryan Fitzpatrick, where instead of being the high variance, like you never know what you're going to get, but it could be spectacular, backup quarterback, he is the no-nonsense, does everything the way it's supposed to be done. His drops are immaculate. He does exactly what he's supposed to do. Backup quarterback. They're literally polar opposites. And for the Browns right now, I think you'd love to have that guy, because at least he could just run the offense as it's meant to be run. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. It's going to be week to week, but it gives your defense a better chance than probably what a rookie quarterback could do for you.
Yeah, I'd have to imagine that during preparation, and they would see Dobbs's ability to read and process, and so it does make you wonder, what would the game look like? Line look like if Dobbs was the quarterback? Would it shift at all? Would it go back in Cleveland's favor a little bit here? And
Right.
so either way, the fact of the matter is Steelers are going to be playing in Week 11 against a rookie quarterback in his second NFL start. Dorian Thompson-Robinson is not a big dude at all, and so definitely some things working against him. Obviously a great athlete, and so he can get the Steelers a little bit with his legs, and so it makes me wonder if they'll try to exploit that at all. The Steelers missing 2 linebackers and their 2 most athletic linebackers, and so perhaps they can try to do something like that against Pittsburgh. All right, Shayne, let's talk about some of the biggest matchups to watch this week. We noted that Browns starting left tackle Jedrick Wills is out, unfortunately, on IR, which means that Alex Highsmith is projected to have a matchup against James Hudson III. I kind of liked Hudson at the Senior Bowl coming back a few years back, but this matchup certainly favors Highsmith, and it already favored Highsmith going against Wills. You just put him in a spin cycle, I feel like, when he goes against Jedrick typically, and now you get the backup, and there could be a couple backups in this game.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge matchup because, Alex didn't have the best game against the Packers. The pass rush kind of did get quelled for the most part. I mean, TJ got his sack, but it wasn't. So, especially the edges were pretty well protected. And part of that, I think, is the amount of snaps those guys played. They just weren't as fresh as you'd like them to be. So, hopefully they can get a little bit more rest in a game like this. But ultimately, this is a huge matchup because Hudson is certainly not a finished product. I don't think he's really a true starting tackle in the league. And I think that's why he obviously hasn't been, right? Wills being out is why he's playing. And Highsmith should be able to take advantage of him. Now, if he doesn't, that's going to be a serious concern because that's probably our best path to getting some extra points there by getting a strip sack or something along those lines from Alex like he did last week or last time they played. But again, like the pass rush on both sides has the advantage for sure. It's just which one I think makes the most impact is going to probably determine the outcome of this game.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to see too, because if Dawan Jones does play as well, he might not be at full strength. He did a good job against Watt last time, and I think pass protection is his thing because he is just a brick wall.
It's just hard to get around.
He outweighs everybody that he goes against by 100 pounds, and he's got a bigger wingspan than any edge defender he will ever face. And so, just such a rare body type. So that will be a pretty big loss as well if he's not able to go for this game. So keep an eye on the injury reports as we go throughout this week. Obviously, nothing yet. We're still early as we record this show on Wednesday afternoon here. The biggest one, I think, regardless of either side of the ball, it's got to be Dan Moore Jr. against Myles Garrett. This is, I mean, Shayne, I'm kind of fed up with the narrative that Dan Moore contains Myles every time these two teams play. When you go back and watch the film, Garrett is getting in there all the time, and he's getting in there lightning fast. It's just that the Steelers also happen to be getting rid of the ball really fast because they know that Garrett is right on their heels. And so it's not that Moore has played him really well. And I think the Steelers need to devote more attention to Moore. But it's hard to neutralize a player like Myles Garrett. And you can say, all right, we have this debate, whatever. Watt versus Garrett. They're very different football players. Honestly, Shayne, and I hate saying this. I hate to say it. I probably would cast my defensive player of the year vote for Myles Garrett right now. It kills me. It kills me. But the Browns have the number 1 DVOA defense. They're number 1 in EPA. Myles Garrett is crushing it in a league above everybody else in terms of pass rush win rate and his efficiency rushing the quarterback. I know that he can't do some things that Watt does. He's not as an elite of a run defender. He typically doesn't come up with as many splash plays like TJ Watt. And again, I'm not Watt bashing at all. I think Watt is still easily top 4 or 5 player at his position easily. Myles Garrett has been really, really good this year, and he's on the number 1 defense in the league, and a defense that allows 151 passing yards a game. I think that he's kind of earned that right to be in the defensive player of the year front runner conversation. And right now his odds are reflected as such.
Yeah, and I think the big issue here is we talk about Dan Moore versus Myles Garrett. It's been a conversation the past couple of years. If you watch the games and you don't just look at the stat sheet afterwards, he's just beating him every single time, essentially.
Yeah.
And that is, again, it's really hard for a player like Moore to handle Garrett. It just is. Every tackle would struggle with him one-on-one for the most part. The problem is people don't realize, okay, the Steelers know that that's going to happen, right? So their game plan, instead of trying to throw a million resources at Garrett, they're just like, we're just going to throw the ball as soon as possible so it doesn't matter. And yeah, that kind of it limits your game plan, but their game plan is already limited anyway. So I don't even know how much that matters if we're being honest about it, right? And I think that's the thing, is it doesn't mean that Garrett is bad against us. It means that he is not literally allowed to be good. Like, they do not allow him to create the plays. And I think that's the one thing I will say about the Garrett Watt situation is, like, if you want to have a conversation about who the best pure pass rushers in the NFL are, Watt is in that conversation, but he's not firmly ahead of, the other 4 or 5 guys in that conversation. It's when you start talking about edge rushers and edge defenders in general, where I will tell you that TJ Watt is the best edge defender because of his combination of skills. That's where I think people get confused with that sometimes, of like, if you're asking me who the best pass rushers are, you also have to include interior guys in that conversation. It's not just an edge situation. If you're talking about edge rushers, then I do have Watt as the top edge in the league, but because of the multitude of things he does for our defense. People get mad about it. Fans don't like it when you say that, because it's like, it's like TJ has the skills as a pass rusher to be in that conversation. It's not that. It's that he just doesn't win with the same ways and the same speed that some of the other guys can physically do. It's not something against TJ. It's just not something that is in his skill set the way that it is for those guys. He wins in different ways. He wins in ways that give him the statistical production that you want. It's just not exactly the same as some of the other guys. So again, the Garrett thing is, as far as the matchup goes, he's going to get his. It's just going to be whether or not they do a good enough job of preventing him from making the big play.
Yeah, and that's a fair assessment, Shayne. And you pointed it out. Like, this is why we can't just be box score checkers.
Right, you can't be, because you won't know.
Yeah, when you go back and watch Garrett and just how utterly disruptive he was when when he got this matchup against Dan Moore last time, like, it was concerning. And so it does have an impact on the game. Remember, Steelers won that game 26-22, but it required 2 defensive touchdowns. So it wasn't because the offense was doing a great job moving the ball at all.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder too, because Jim Schwartz does get creative. He might move Garrett over to the other side occasionally, but he's going probably have the best matchup, I would assume, if he stays home at right edge. I'd like to see him against Brerk, honestly, for a few snaps. I want to see a freaky guy against another freaky guy, and
for sure.
I know that's. I mean, it doesn't get any more difficult than that for Brerk, having to not know who's going to line up against you every time. And if he gets a couple of those reps against Garrett, I'd like to see how he looks, because I've been impressed with Brerk so far.
I actually think it'd be really fun to see that, mostly because I don't know if, I think Garrett wouldn't have as much success as even he probably should, because I feel like he wouldn't know how to attack Brerk, because his technique and his plan as a pass protector is so weird right now.
Yeah, it is.
It's so predicated on just like, I'm just better physically than you, and he's not necessarily Garrett. Like, those two are better breaks. Like, I think Garrett might not really know 100% what to do against him, just because I feel like his edge rush
Yeah.
is really hard right now because like there's not a lot of tape on him. He kind of just gets it done based on sheer athleticism and willpower. And it's fun to watch for now, and you hope he gets a little bit more technical, but like it would be fun to watch for sure, if nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, Broderick's anchoring strength, recovery
Mhm.
ability, it just quickness
Stupid.
off of his stance, like all that stuff is just it's crazy to
Yeah.
watch the difference between a Corafor and more, and then you go to that,
Mhm.
and I'm just like, wow,
Yeah, it's a
it's. I
different guy.
mean, he definitely has some upside, so hopefully he can put together another
Yeah.
strong performance here. I think that all three of his starts, he's really done a good
Yes.
job. Two at right
Yes.
tackle, one at left tackle. Broderick is obviously starting at right tackle now for the Steelers, and so hard to be disappointed with the results when the Steelers are running for 205 yards. Like
No.
ultimately, like what you and I both said, we'd love for him to be the blindside protector, that left tackle of the future, that 10-year left tackle type guy. But maybe it won't matter. Like if he just ends up being good on the right side, well, you need another tackle anyway. Maybe next time
Yeah.
you can go out and get your left tackle. So it's nice to have that position flexibility at the very least. Let's talk about Kenny Pickett against the Browns cornerbacks. A really good group here in the secondary, and this is scary because we saw Lamar Jackson throw a pick six this past week. These guys have been awesome, and like I said, 151 passing yards allowed per game. The Steelers are only garnering 179 passing yards a game under Kenny Pickett, and so it's the combination of these two things going together that could make it really bad. Like I really hope there's not a world that the Steelers finish the game with less than 100 passing yards, but I don't think anybody would be overly shocked if they were around that mark because the secondary was so good. Now, hopefully, they can take advantage, find some ways to get some big plays. But you do have to watch out. These guys can take the ball away. They got tight coverage. I expect a lot of tight window throws in this one.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem for Kenny in this game is like he right now he's there's been a lot of times where I think he's late to diagnose things, and that's
Mhm.
part of why we've seen him go to like the first read or nothing type of gameplay recently. And against the Browns, they're just so fast and they run around and they're always in passing lanes that it's really easy. Like the Lamar interception for a touchdown, right? It wasn't like he threw the ball right to a guy. It got tipped up in the air and picked up. Like they're always around the ball, and it feels like you have to be very precise with your throws if you want to get them through all that traffic. And let's be honest, Kenny has not been particularly precise this year in general, right? I mean, he did throw a pick against them. Last time these two played, he kind of threw it right to a defender, didn't expect him to be there. Like, that's the type of stuff that can happen against the Browns, especially with the way they're playing in the front four. Like, you have to get the ball out quickly. And if they know that, they can attack downhill at those throws, right? And that's whenever you can get into major trouble. I think they have an avenue here, though. I think if they can protect Pickett for a few seconds, I do think the secondary is not unbeatable by any means. And I think they have the separators in Deontay, and they have the physical presence in Pickens to get some plays on this team. We saw it even in that game occasionally where Kenny did make a couple big throws, especially the one to Pickens that went for a touchdown. Like it's there, but I
Mhm.
fear that they're not going to be willing to try to get them this time around.
Yeah. I agree with that because that's what I was going to say as well, because I think that Mike Tomlin, knowing this team well, knowing how fast the pressure is probably going to get there, you can't hang back and try to make things happen, especially if they want to execute their game plan, which is we're going to play pretty conservative, not turn the ball over, run the football and win these games. So let's talk about the running game for a second. Will the Steelers be able to run the ball effectively against the Cleveland Browns? And the Browns have the 7th ranked rushing defense in the NFL. Like I said, they're already first in pass defense. They're first in EPA. They're first in DVOA. This is just a really good defense with
Mhm.
talent everywhere. And the DPOY front runner right now in Myles Garrett, who's having, I think, the best season of his career. And
Yeah.
so there is a lot to overcome. And especially for this offensive line, who obviously we can't say has played well the whole season. It's only been these last couple of games, really. And so you wonder if the matchup has part to do with that, like going against
Yeah.
the Titans and then a kind of depleted Packers team a little bit. So how will they match up here? Now, I think it's worth saying that the Browns right now, over their last 6 games, they've allowed 111 rushing yards per contest. And so that's a pretty good chunk on the ground. You combine that with the fact Steelers are averaging 185 over their last 2 games, playing their best football with Broderick Jones in the lineup. I mean, just some craters of holes to go through in these last 2 games. Like a couple of those, you could have driven a truck through. Is how
Yeah.
wide they
Yeah.
just open these holes, and so we love seeing that. I mean, in terms of efficiency and overall volume of the rushing, this is the Steelers' best performance they've had in over a year. I think it was week 8, I think, of last year's New Orleans game, whatever week that was last year when they ran for like 217 yards.
Najee had the big like 40-something yard run, and I remember.
Yep. So it's the best they've had in a year, and so you'd like to see that trend continue because I think that's a recipe for success. It makes it so Pickett's not going to have to throw as much, take as much risk, fumbling, getting sacked in the backfield, and so can they operate this? Can they run their style of football and ground and pound style against the Browns this week?
I think it's totally possible. I think the issue with the Browns is, last year with the Browns, their biggest issue in run defense was they didn't have the horses up front in the middle, and their defense was very much Joe Barry-esque in the sense that it was very, soft. They weren't playing a ton of aggressive coverage or aggressive fronts. Now they are certainly much more aggressive, and they're much more up in your face. And the downside to that, though, is if they are aggressive and you block everything up, you're going to have a lane and you're going to be able to run for a while. Like that's the main thing about, there's that trade-off, right? I think being aggressive is always the better play in the NFL nowadays because defenses are such a disadvantage most of the time because of the rules that you might as well try to be aggressive and go for the big plays. That does have its downside, though, because if you are able to run on those fronts while they're bringing a bunch of guys and everyone's coming up, if you block it up perfectly, you're going to have a clear lane. And I think especially a guy like Jaylen Warren, more so than Harris in this game, I think has the advantage because if he does squeak through a hole or if he does have the opportunity to get the edge, you might run for a while. We saw Keaton Mitchell's run against the Browns in the Ravens game where he screwed up the sideline. Now, granted, he's a different level of speed than anyone, even Warren or anything. But those plays are there against this Browns defense if you can block it up right. And I think we have a better chance of doing that with Roderick in the lineup this time, and just in general the way the Browns have been playing against the run. I think the problem is even with a rookie quarterback, like can we sustain drives enough and can we get up to be able to lean on the run game? And we score a couple times to give ourselves the ability to just not even have to put the ball in the air that much.
That is the question, Shayne. And because the more you run the ball, the more it kind of limits the upside of your offense in any particular game, just because you are counting on yourself to methodically move the ball down the field. Eventually, it's likely that your drive is going to stall. So if they are going to run the ball, they need to be able to do so effectively. You can't just pound the ball 40 times for 80 yards in this game. It's that game plan obviously is not going to work. And so what they've been doing has been working. Now, if you ever question the effectiveness of a good coordinator, either side of the football, look at the difference in the Browns going from Joe Woods to Jim Schwartz, night and day. I mean, Myles Garrett, to my knowledge, I think I looked this up before, since he came to the league in 2017, has never finished with a top 16 defense he never finished top half of the league. And now the Browns are number 1 in most distinguishable categories right now in terms of defense entering week 11. Like a coordinator makes a big difference. The fact that they can get so creative with that. And so I give Schwartz a lot of credit. I think that if the Steelers do start to run the ball well, he's going to be able to find a way, unlike Joe Barry was able to do against the running game, obviously last week. But I think that Schwartz will be able to find a way to neutralize that somewhat. And so the Steelers may have to find a counterattack. Can they do something through the air now if they're just going to stack the box against us? I think if I was Jim Schwartz and I'm running this defense, my goal would be I'm going to make Kenny Pickett beat us in this football game. I know that we don't have a great quarterback either, but I'm going to make Kenny Pickett beat us through the air. I'm not going to allow the Steelers to run for 180, 200 yards like they've been doing. And I think that if they can operate that effectively against the Steelers, Pittsburgh could be in trouble in this game. All right, Shayne, let's move on to our keys to success while we're talking about such things. Let's talk about our key on offense. What do the Steelers need to do to come away victorious?
I think, and you kind of just touched on it, the plan should be to try to dominate the game in the trenches on the ground. However, you have to also have a counterpunch to that if it doesn't work, because we've seen this team consistently when they try to do their thing and it doesn't work, they just lean into it anyway and don't really adjust to try to make those changes, especially offensively. They have to have a plan for if they bring an 8-man box every play and we can't get the run game going, what do you do? Is your go-to to go to play action, which this team has been really good at doing when they do it, but don't ever do it? Is it going to spread things out and try to force them to cover everybody in space more? Is it using more of the 3 wide receiver sets? Whatever it may be. They have to have a game plan for dealing with what happens if you get down early, or more specifically, if your run game just isn't working. Because if you just continue, like you said, to run into a brick wall, like it kind of felt like they were doing early in the season, you're just basically punting the game away and waiting for your defense to do it for you. And yeah, it's worked for them. I don't want to see it. Like, take initiative a little bit here with this. Like, have something you can go to, whether it's the quick passing game or whatever it is. Have an actual plan in place to deal with the likelihood that everything isn't going to be easy running the ball and playing defense.
Yeah, I think that that's going to be a key as well, Shayne. And I'm going to side with Mike Tomlin and his backwards philosophy just for this week. I'm not going to do it every week,
against this
but for
team.
this week,
I can, yeah.
Against this team, considering the circumstances, you got Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting at quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. Don't turn the ball over. And typically, I'm all for aggressiveness. I mean, I talked about it on the show yesterday. If you want to see what the Steelers have in Kenny Pickett, they need to find out. They need to do it this year.
Yeah.
As to not waste any more time with their aging defense and what they have going for them. But for this game, Shayne, I'm okay with the Steelers playing a little bit of conservative football because I do feel like if the Steelers win the takeaway battle and they don't turn that ball over, they win this football game.
Yeah.
Because I don't see the Browns scoring a lot of points in this contest. I think it's reasonable to think that if you don't hand them the ball, that the Steelers could win this game and only allow 13 or 17 points on the board. And so that should be enough to get it done, even if you just play conservative ball like you've been doing all year. And again, overall, I don't love the game plan. I think it will work for this time around against the Browns. Defensively, Shayne, what do the Steelers need to do?
I think, and this kind of goes into what you said, like with DTR starting for them, I think you have to bring pressure to this kid because he has to feel it. He has to know, okay, I'm facing the Steelers defense right now and all their pass rushers, all the plays they make. You have to give him something to be worried about right away. Like, do not let him sit back there and try to get comfortable and get it moving because Stefanski's going to want to try to get him comfortable as soon as possible. That's with the running game. That's with short passes, trying to get the ball out of his hands quick. Bring pressure right up the middle with the linebackers. I talked about it earlier with, what's the plan for the linebacker position. I think in this game, you bring those two as much as you can. And I'm talking 5-man blitzes, 6-man blitzes. Bring the pressure because if you force the ball out of his hand quickly, at least the big gaps that have been in the back end of the defense aren't going to be there because you can't get the ball there anyway. Like, there's an element of that I think would fit for this specific game. And you talked about it offensively too. Like, this is the one game that I will say, you know what, Mike, you're right about this game, right? Play your game, do what you normally do every week anyway. It actually is probably one of the better plans for this particular game, at least.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Steelers, they have to be salivating after knowing what you're going up against this week at a rookie quarterback in his second ever NFL start. I do think the Steelers have the personnel to slow down the run game of Cleveland this week, especially knowing that you've got those big thumping linebackers in there, Landon Roberts, Mark Robinson, the guys that like to come downhill anyway. What scares me a little bit in terms of their defensive matchup against the Browns offense this week is Dorian Thompson-Robinson does have some wheels on him. He can get out in space. He can extend the play and he can also run with the football. And so I would feel a little bit better in that regard, obviously, if Cole Holcomb and or Quan Alexander was playing in this game. Obviously, both are done for the season. And so you could essentially spy a little bit, have a little bit more juice out in space so that if they do decide to get creative there and kind of get him on the move a little bit, I like the Steelers' chances of slowing that down a little bit better. I'm not too worried about the passing game overall, as up and down as it's been for the Steelers. When I see him start shredding the Steelers, then I'll be a little bit scared. I don't think that's probably going to happen, considering the tackle matchups that the Steelers pass rushers are going to be getting and knowing the pressure that should be coming on DTR at least anyway. And so I think kind of just containing him and making sure he doesn't explode for one of these runs. It's going to get him down in field goal range, that type of stuff. And I think that the Steelers defense should have a pretty favorable matchup this week. All right, Shayne, let's get to our game predictions before we sign off for today. Steelers versus Browns, week 11 on the road here for Pittsburgh. How do you see this game going? What's your final score?
So again, the odds makers, they expect a low scoring kind of drag it out fight. And I definitely agree with that. I think that if the Steelers win, it is going to be, as always, very close, right? I do think they're going to win this game. I think it's just really hard for the Browns to overcome starting a rookie quarterback against the Steelers team. And I think that they'll be able to do enough offensively. It's not going to be an explosion. They're probably not going to score 26 points like they did in the last matchup because their defense probably won't score twice. Granted, you can make the argument that they could because this is a rookie quarterback, but I'm not going to be the one to do it. I will say Steelers pull one out 17-14. they'll manage to be able to get a field goal probably late to get ahead and be done with it from there.
Okay, Shayne, you and we're very much on the same page here.
figured,
I've got
yeah.
the Steelers winning 16-13. So
Ooh, okay.
right in that same wheelhouse. And so we think it's going to be one of these types of slugfest
AFC
games.
North,
Obviously,
man. AFC North.
it's AFC North football at its finest right
Yeah.
here. And so
Yeah.
we know how good Cleveland's defense is. We know how badly Kenny Pickett and the offense have been struggling in the passing game. So when you get that combination, it is going to cap the Steelers offense. Unfortunately, I would actually be a little bit surprised if they were able to get to the 20-point mark in this game, Shayne. The Steelers score 16.6 on the season, 15.5 offensive points. It's not about to get any better against Cleveland's defense. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was even lower scoring, like a 10-6 type game. Like I think it has that potential to it, knowing the quarterbacks that are starting and the defensive players that are going to be in this game. So that's our thoughts. What are you guys' thoughts? Make sure you drop them down in the chat and be sure to join us. We do this live show every single Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. We also do a live show on Tuesdays. I'm going to be out for a bit on paternity leave here, and Shayne, I think, is going to have a guest with us next time. Thank you all for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Steel Curtain podcast and scan that promo code at the top. Thanks for listening to the Steel Curtain podcast.